everyone. Today is our last COVID-19 community discussion. So my name is Amanda Martinez. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a social work major here at the university. And today we will be focusing on looking at bicultural identities. So I have another intern here with me today.
Okay, well, my name is Ayak Deng, and I am a senior as well this year. I am an anthropology major, minoring in women and gender studies. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and
So since we will be talking about bicultural identities, we do want to explain kind of our own project we did on women of color. This project, we interviewed various women of color to look at how they have experienced higher education throughout COVID-19. And then we used a photo voice methodology, which pretty much was used to capture photos in order to show their experiences. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
No, I think you got it pretty well.
So we will move on into today's event. So we will start with the question, what does it mean to be bicultural, and what is your background?
Okay, sure. So basically to be bicultural is to occupy two different cultures while you're hosted in one area. So you can either be moving from one country to another, or you could be being raised by parents who come from a different country. So I am the first one. So I moved here from Sudan in 2004. So it's like 6.
And then I would agree with Ayak's definition of bicultural, of just having the two different cultures playing a role in my experience. And then my parents are actually immigrated from Mexico. And then, so I was born here, so that'd be like Mexican American for me. So how do you balance both cultural identities? Do you feel like you are equally representing both cultures in your daily life?
I guess for me, I separated into like the home space, which is like more private, and then just like my public life, which is more like, I guess you would say, the Western part of it. So like growing up, I grew up in like, I guess you could say, a traditionally Sudanese home. So like we try to speak our language, try to eat our food. We, decorated with our cultural like customs and stuff like that. So that was definitely a big part of my upbringing. But like when I'm not at home, it's a different culture, I guess. It's a Western culture. So I definitely conform to that when I'm not in my home space.
I personally do feel like I represent both cultures, but I guess it would just be like based on the environment I'm in, which culture I represent more of. So like more like in school and education, I feel like I'm not as comfortable like expressing my Mexican background. And then, but like back home and stuff, like I do enjoy the food and all the traditions behind it. Do you feel any restrictions in expressing both cultures?
Kind of a little bit. Like in public, I'm not like super, obviously my name's Ayak, so there's your first hint that I am not American, but I'm not super like out there with my Sudanese culture. And I kind of want to tie this back to our research, because we found that there are restrictions that we didn't really think about. Like, for example, we had participants talk about how we don't serve any different types of food on campus, and how like when we do that, it's like exotic, and that's not really a good word, but like, like it's like supposed to be special, you're supposed to be showcasing, and it doesn't really feel like you're a part of the environment. You're just like kind of like a tokenized piece.
So looking at restrictions, I feel like because I'm not represented within my environment, I kind of am not like able to kind of express my culture. So just going off like the food coming to college, like it was a big culture shock for me because going from eating what I traditionally eat to like primarily like American food. And then like I do wish we had more food options, but when they did offer those, it did seem like, oh, it's like this big event instead of just like having it there for us. So in what ways does the COVID-19 pandemic leave your bicultural identity vulnerable?
I would say that there's already like pressure to perform like both identities. You know, you're a different person at home where you practice your like kind of origin culture, and then you're a different person in public where you are just kind of like everybody else, you know. So there is a pressure to just kind of keep switching back and forth, and like once you do kind of become like aware that like they are different spaces, it kind of becomes like exhausting because you realize like, okay, I have to like, this is not appropriate here and this is not appropriate here, and I don't want to be judged in both spaces, so I have to be aware of like what I'm doing at all times. So I think like it can lead to a feeling of like marginalization, just feeling like you don't really belong anywhere because you're constantly trying to like be someone different.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it is exhausting just because like the different environments you have to like juggle with, and like they have like different expectations like with family and education, like especially once COVID hit, like I saw myself more like trying to help out my family, especially since there is that barrier, that cultural and language barrier. But yeah, I feel like the pandemic has definitely impacted me.
Yeah.
So, taking a look into education, how does your bicultural identity impact your education, and what roles do both cultures play?
I guess you can kind of take it back to like your upbringing and how you're raised, and like how, like for example, like my family, of course we value education, right? And like of course my community wants me to pursue higher education and like build a career, but at the same time my mom was married when she was like 14, so I know that she didn't get to continue her education, so she doesn't really understand what it means to like to keep going, and like what kind of like stressor that is, or like how, you know, how to cope with that. So there is that like that feeling of knowing that like your home space might, they may like they want something good for you, but they don't understand the work you have to put in. So it can kind of lead to that feeling of like am I accomplishing anything, if you know. So it's just like that separation of values, I guess.
So I feel like within my family, education is really highly valued, and I think that really influenced me to pursue my education. So I feel like throughout like the past 4 years, I definitely had like that pressure with me throughout this whole time to just like do my best and like just being able to like get my degree eventually. So I think that really played a role, and then just impacted me like wanting to do my best and like yeah. But on the other side, like I feel like there isn't as much pressure. So I feel like that's why my cultural background from my family is like the one that I follow for my education.
Definitely.
And then looking at what support have you received from the university throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and has there been a lack of support? I feel like I had a lot of support, especially like through the Division of Academic Support of Inclusive Excellence and the Women's Center. I feel like it, like just the people here have really helped me like want like kind of on this journey to like reach my goals. They have provided me with resources like different grants that I can apply to, which have helped me especially during the pandemic, like because I have a campus job, so I wasn't able to work, so that grant really helped. And overall, just yeah, like provided me with different opportunities, like professionally as well.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. The Women's Center has definitely helped me too during this time. Also, like in the social aspect of just being able to like come in and just see people. That's nice. Um, and to kind of go back to our research, we had um, we had participants say that they were supported by grants and they were supported by like just like professors who knew how to be empathetic, so it made that transition a lot better. Um, and for lack of support, we also had people talk about mental health, like having representation so that you have someone to go talk to, and just maybe a lack of understanding like the tech and how that was a barrier.
Yeah, I feel like also, even though some professors were supportive, I feel like there was also that lack of understanding from like bicultural identities, and then looking in our research for women of color overall too. So I feel like that's an area like that needs to be improved, because we are like juggling a lot in our lives, especially moving back home for those who did. Okay, so moving on into family and culture, how has your culture played a role in how you have experienced the pandemic?
Um, I guess that it keeps going back to just the overall theme of being bicultural. So your family is your other culture, basically, and then there's the other side. So I think that my culture, I guess it's caused some barriers in terms of like just having to like help my family out in with understanding like certain information and just trying to like break down certain things that are happening right now, because it is like a confusing time and there's always new information coming out. So just trying to like help keep up with that, I think is really how my culture has played a role.
Yeah, I would agree, like having to juggle different aspects of life, especially like helping my family a lot more with like misinformation, like you mentioned. Um, just because like the language barrier, so having them more like translate stuff. And then also when like the vaccine started coming out, my parents were interested in getting the vaccine, so just like helping them find appointments and stuff. And then I think that's all. um have you seen any differences between your home life and your school and public life?
um have I seen any differences?
And like how they differ?
Oh, okay. I mean, they're two different cultures, so they differ pretty hard. But I think that, at least for myself, like since we moved here from a different country, I've seen how time like kind of influences change, and how like first, like when we first got here, is super strict, like super. This is our culture. Like I need you to speak your language and keep your customs, and just keep going. And then it's like as time goes on, you kind of see that kind of fading. Like not a lot, but kind of a lot. So you just kind of see like how I don't know, just like seeing people be more lenient and like kind of letting go of some of those values that they carried over, and how that kind of transitions to different values that are like more Western, I guess. So, um, I mean, they definitely differ from each other, but I can definitely see how they're also like starting to come together as well.
So for my home life, I feel like there is more pressure and it is more strict, like you mentioned. So, and like in comparison to like school and public, it does feel more lenient and like kind of having more freedom.
Mhm.
So yeah, those are like the biggest differences I've seen between those two. And then, how does your culture and family view education, and what role has COVID-19 played in your educational experience? So, for me, education, like I mentioned before, is highly valued within my culture and family. So that's why like I have felt that pressure, especially during the pandemic and like still doing good, being able to finish all my assignments and like even though like it was such a tough time, like still like taking advantage of opportunities. Like I know over the summer I was a part of an internship, so that it was really draining, but at the end it was like um it like did feel good to be able to accomplish that. But yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say, like I said before, my family, my culture in general, they do value education, but I do always have to just remember that, um, that like we came as refugees, so like you're already coming from a lot of like distress and trauma and like kind of just like instability. So as much as we value education, like it, it might not it might not mean the same thing, or it might not like they might not understand it the same way as maybe how like my school environment understands it, you know. So um I think that it has helped me in a positive manner, even though like the values don't always like line up, because it does, like Amanda said, it does push me to do well and to continue doing well, because I know that like my family values it in the long run. It's not just like the good grades right now. It's about like what does it mean in the future and how does that actually like play out. So I guess yeah, it's definitely helped me and it has played a role in my educational experience.
Yeah, and then especially for me, like seeing my parents like immigrate from Mexico and also not even like having the chance to finish their education or get any higher education. I think that really empowered me to like get mine and like keep me going, especially throughout the pandemic. Um, so does gender play a role?
Um, I think gender plays a role. I think that unfortunately, like a lot of cultures, we do have gender roles, you know, and they're maybe it's not super obvious right away, but like it's in the little ways that you're treated. And like, of course, my family values education once again, but like I also know that like to be a woman or a girl as a Sudanese person, you know, there's a lot of different things that are seen as important as well. You know, like taking care of your family. Like I can imagine that a lot of people in my culture would say like that's probably the most important thing that a woman should do or can do, you know, and like and then in Western like lens that seems very like oppressive, you know. So there is that balancing of like, okay, I know that I'm not being oppressed by my culture. I just know that my gender means something different than what it means here. And sometimes that collides in a way that's kind of difficult.
Yeah, I definitely see gender roles like within my own culture, and I feel like as a woman, I do have higher expectations to like meet from my family, but like you said, like they may not be as obvious, but like I do like always catch them and like try to go against them. And then like I'll see like sometimes I'll like talk to my mom like, oh, that's not right, just because like I'm
Right.
a girl like doesn't mean that I have to do this or that.
Right.
Or that I'm also like I can like do these other things just because it's just not because like I'm not a guy doesn't mean I can't do those things.
Yeah, I definitely feel that.
So yeah, there's a lot of pressure from that. How has your upbringing in your home affected the way you view education?
I think we kind of already covered that.
Yeah, I guess I would just say like again, just how big education was growing up for me, and like because my older brother went to college, so kind of just seeing him go through it, I feel like I was kind of expected to go too, but I also did want to go as well.
Yeah.
Um, so what are some language barriers that exist related to the COVID-19 pandemic in your life?
We kind of covered it a little bit earlier, but just in terms of like just family and helping them navigate through this confusion, I guess, is definitely the biggest language barrier, just making sure that I can kind of translate that information over in a way that makes sense. And, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I realize like kind of what a hard position, like, for example, like my mom or like maybe some of my older family members are in, because like even when you explain this information, it's not like it makes perfect sense, It's not like super crystal clear. So it's like this information is already confusing to a person like myself who like, I've been going to school, I'm fluent in English, like I can read. So it's like I'm already kind of confused. So I'm trying to like give this information to you and expect you to make your own judgments when it's like, there is still that barrier that I can't like make you fully understand it, especially when I don't even fully understand it. So yeah.
Yeah, like in knowing two languages, like I feel like in my head I'm thinking of both of them, but at the same time, like even though like I know both English and Spanish, I do feel like in both I do struggle. So like, but besides that, I like do need to like help my family with the translations, even though like sometimes I struggle with it. But yeah, just overall like helping family, I would say was the biggest like language barrier, especially since like they don't really understand English as much.
Yeah.
So looking into mental health, how has COVID-19 affected your mental health?
I think that it's highlighted for me personally areas that I need to focus in on, and like maybe areas that I was ignoring before because we weren't in a pandemic. So I think that's definitely what it's done for me, making me realize like self-care, like we definitely use that in a weird way in this culture where it's just kind of like, oh, like it's fun, it's supposed to be like expensive and quick, when it's like in reality it's supposed to be a daily thing, and it doesn't mean paint your nails every day or whatever, but like it does mean that you need to like be present with yourself and like be aware of like what is happening around you and how that does actually affect how you feel. And I think COVID's done that for me because I've had more time to just kind of think about like, what am I going through? Because everything is kind of like slower, but it's a lot at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely has impacted my mental health, and like you said, like revealed areas that I do need to work on, like improving on my self-care. I feel like it was very stressful, like having to go through your education and like helping family and all these things within the pandemic. But yeah. So do you feel like you had support to understand your mental health?
I know that in our research we found that basically everyone was like, no, we don't have especially on campus, we don't have the proper support to help us feel like we have someone there for us. So that was a huge thing that we saw. It's like there's no well, I can't say no, but like there's barely any representation within our mental health professionals. So it left people feeling isolated in a time where they're already isolated. So that definitely was a factor. But for myself, I feel that I kind of do, because of just like my education in like gender studies and anthropology and stuff. I think those are fields that are more about like, people and like focusing in on like how people are impacted. So I'm starting to like realize like, okay, well, this is why I feel like this, because of how everything works. So I definitely feel like that's supporting me, but overall, probably not as much as I would need to maintain good mental health.
Yeah, I feel like within my family and overall culture, like mental health is not something that's really discussed, and like if it is discussed, like oh like you'll get over it, or like oh you're just going through like a tough time. So maybe that's why like I feel I really haven't like seeked out like actual mental health support. But yeah, like looking at the research, like since there is not a lot of representation, I feel like there is like something that needs to be done to like implement like a program or something through like the counseling services to help like bicultural identities and like women of color.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
So how does your culture play a role in your mental health? I mean, I kind of like touched on it.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of go off of that. I agree with what Amanda said. I think it's also like interesting to see how, even though Amanda and I come from like completely different cultural backgrounds, I'm seeing a lot of like overlap with a lot of these bicultural identities, especially with mental health, and how like it's kind of a taboo thing, you know. It's kind of like you don't talk about it, or like you're just trying to like, you know, stay strong and keep going. So I just thought that was interesting, like how even like participants in our study, we had Hmong people, we had I don't know, so many, we had different backgrounds of bicultural identities, and yeah, that was such a huge overlap. So it's just like, that's interesting. But yeah, definitely not something that is talked about a lot or really at all, I would say, because I don't think like acknowledging that someone is like sad is really talking about mental health, you know, or it's really talking about how to deal with mental health. So I can definitely like look back at my life and realize like, oh, that's not something that was discussed with me really, you know. It's just like I just assumed emotions are emotions, and no one really said, well, hey, you can sit back and like observe them, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. And what are some ways you have practiced self-care?
I just try to like, I've realized like that my outside surroundings are very reflective of how I feel inside. So, you know, I'm just like aware of like keeping my space like clean for myself so that I feel like I'm okay and just maintaining myself, you know, eating right, drinking water, sleeping, like those are all things that you just expect people to do, but like when it comes down to it, those are things that people neglect and play a huge role in mental health, you know. So
for me, I definitely agree, like trying to actually like follow a healthier lifestyle and drinking more water and finding time to sleep. Right. And then especially since like with COVID we were on our computers a lot, like trying to find some time to get outdoors and like taking hikes. That's what I like to do. Yeah. And then just spending time with like other people, especially since like COVID we weren't really had the ability to see a lot of people. But yeah. So that's all the questions we had today. Thank you, Ayak, for being here. And thank you everyone for listening.